YouTube, Dark Magician of Team Sorcerers here, and welcome back to What If Wednesday. And this is another one that's been requested by Dragon Master 25. And this is I have to say, this is a really random one, which he suggested, but I'll go with it anyway. And that is, what if my third favourite deck was a fairy deck of some kind? But I just figured, sure, why not? Let's go for it. So yeah, this would be something that would take the place of Rainbow Neos, and I guess Rainbow Neos would be bumped down to 4th and Legendary Hero 5th. Now, the thing is, there's not a lot of fairy decks that are enjoyable. In fact, there's been quite a few that have pissed the player base off over the years, or in this case me, like Counter Fairies and Trick Stars, Counter Fairies being my second most hated deck in the entire game. Like, seriously, it's so fucking toxic. And of course Trick Stars, which is just a bullshit OTK deck. So yeah, those fairy decks, out of the question, definitely. I mean, something I probably would dabble in is probably agents, but I don't know if I'd play them when they were meta. Now, the thing is, I did actually play a generic fairy deck back in the day. It's one of those decks I used to have that's not well known, I must admit. But yeah, I had a generic fairy deck in like around about 2007, and it did have Venus and Mystic Shine Ball plus Moisture Creature. But I think later on down the line, what I'd probably do is make a deck involving my absolute favourite fairy type monster in the game, Air Knight Parshath. And yes, this is an original print from Legacy of Darkness. I've had this Air Knight Parshath since 2004, and I've still kept it all these years, even when it wasn't being played. I think I started playing it again like back when making pass format decks was more of a thing, like GOAT in this case. So what I do is basically make a Parshath deck. Whether or not I'd run a Dark Knight Parshath is another story, but I don't know. But yeah, Air Knight Parshath is something I've always liked. Not so much when used against me, though, back in the day. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, when I first encountered monsters that did piercing, I found them so annoying and bullshit. But later on, I just got used to them, and in this case, I grew to really like Air Knight Parshath. So, I think making a deck with the Parshaths would be what I'd go for, and even end up running the upgraded forms, such as Neo Parshath, the Sky Paladin, and even the Synchro form, Avenging Knight Parshath. So yeah, that would be the focus. Whether or not I'd play the Agent of Mystery Venus and Mystic Shine Ball, I don't know. But yeah, I would definitely need to run Sanctuary of the Sky and even Nova Summoner There's well, I don't know how many people know this, but it's got one of those effects that hardly ever get used. So the full effect, which some may or may not know, is when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon a light fairy with 1500 or less attack from your deck. If the Sanctuary in the Sky is on the field, you can special summon Air Knight Parshaf instead. And I think, oh yeah, Neo Parshaf can be special summoned by tributing the original Air Knight Parshaf. And I think further down the line, I would probably end up running Sacred Arch Air Knight Parshaf, which I guess is a counter fairy support card more than anything. Here, because it says, if you activate a counter trap card, or if you negate the activation of a spell or trap or monster effects, except during the damage step, you can banish 2 other fairy monsters from your hand, field, and or graveyard. Special summon this card from the graveyard if it was there when you activated, negated, or hand if not. So basically hand or graveyard. If this attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing damage. When it inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can add a Parshaf card or counter trap from your deck to your hand. Now, I'm not going to lie, I did actually ban this in Rhetorician format because it's a counter fairy support card, and well, I banned the commonly played cards that counter fairies use. Not any of the counter trap monsters, counter traps, but more like Baleful Artemis, because in my format I don't want counter fairies to be a thing. So I've tried to get rid of as many cards as possible that they do play. That being said, thinking about it, I might actually unban Sacred Arch Air Knight Parshaf. Just to support a potential Parshaf deck, mainly. Depends whether or not I want to do this for a deck building challenge, or whether I just don't bother with it. I don't know. But yeah, there is also their Link monster, Celestial Night Lord Parshaf. Don't worry, that's still allowed in my format, but yeah, it's another generic fairy support card for Link monsters, fairies, and Sanctuary in the Sky and what have you. Just needs 2+ fairies. It might be a bit difficult running Dark Knight Parshaf, because, well, that only works with dark monsters as opposed to fairies. But yeah, it is a cool card, but I still like the original Air Knight Parshaf a lot more. So yeah, if I was to make a deck around it, I'd basically play all the Parshaf cards except for Dark Knight Parshaf. But if and when I do go about creating Rhetorician format in this timeline, I'll have a bit of a dilemma on my hand about whether or not to allow Sacred Arch Air Knight Parshaf. I don't know, but yeah, that would be, I feel like that would be more likely what I'd go for. I don't think I'd end up playing Agent, even in the 5Ds era, because obviously the structure deck, the one we got in 2011, just made them more of a thing and actually made it a top tier meta deck, which got annoying to play against at times, because Christia and Hyperion just were just too strong. Yeah, they were just too overwhelming and too easy to summon, and they were just so hard to beat, even when I'd side in Leeching the Light. In fact, I remember that I used to want Master Hyperion Limited, because my logic behind that was it's a light fairy version of Dark Armed Dragon, and if Dark Armed Dragon was limited, at the time, then Hyperion should have also been limited. And yeah, I also wanted Christia banned. Yeah, Christia's just bullshit and completely unfair. Yeah, that's another fairy that I hate. Which reminds me that Herald is also another hated fairy deck. I mean, as I said before, that's my most hated deck in the entire game, just because of how bullshit, degenerate and unfair Herald of Perfection and Herald of Ultimateness are. Just monsters that negate everything, too easy to summon, and their effects aren't even once per turn. Just absolute bullshit. So yeah, that's definitely also something that would not be on the menu for fairy decks that I'd want to play. But anyway, going back to Christia and Agents, I've never liked Christia, and I never will. Shuts down special summons, too easy to summon, and even if it gets destroyed, it just spins to the top of the deck, ready to use a summon again later. But of course it proved to be annoying, not just in Agents, but also, like I said, Herald, and later on Dark Lords. Of course, it wouldn't surprise me if it was also something that counter fairies used. But as for Agents, I don't think that anymore about Hyperion. I have no beef with Hyperion at all now. In fact, I don't even remember the last time I've seen anyone play Agents. I mean, they're at full power, and yet nobody seems to play them anymore. Yeah. I mean, it's a shame. There's the Agents are really cool, I must admit, regardless of whether they were meta or not. I mean, maybe I would have dabbled in them anyway, but it wouldn't have been a red hot favourite deck. I would have refused to play Christia just because of how much I hate it. But I don't know. Might have got boring to play, to be honest. Even though I do play Hyperion and some Agent cards in my generic fairy deck, which I still have on Edo Pro, just not seen a lot of, shown a lot of games with it. I mean, I did show it in the Ultimate Championship, both Ultimate Championships, but no. I think ultimately, if I was to play a fairy deck and it was my third favourite, it would definitely be based on the Parshaf monsters, and I'd still have Air Knight Parshaf, just because it's it's my favourite fairy type monster, and I guess it would end up being my third favourite monster overall in this timeline. But yeah, that's basically what would happen if my third favourite deck was a fairy deck. actually, no, I didn't describe more about what would happen. What am I on about? I don't know how competitive it would be. I'd have to run some other fairy cards in there. I definitely would have wanted to put Honest in, but depending on when I'd make this fairy deck, if we're talking like 2008 or 2009, then Honest would have been just way too expensive and too difficult to get, since it was only available as a secret rare and a ghost rare. The price would have been too damn high because of Light Swarms, which it was mainly used in. So I'd probably have had to wait until we get the Twilight Edition box thing and try and pick up 3 copies of that, or maybe even just 2, because obviously Honest got semi-limited on the March 2010 list. But yeah, I don't know how I would have done all this in tournaments. It depends how I would have made it. Marshmallow would have had to have been in there. But there'd have been less reason to hate it back then, as I don't know how many of you know this, but Marshmallow used to be a card that I absolutely hated with a passion. Even though well, actually no, that's a lie, because it was still a love-hate card, more of a hated card, although I did play it in my Dark Magician deck in 2008 and Rainbow Neos, so I guess I wouldn't have hated it that much, but it just would have been sort of a necessity for those decks, and I feel like I would have had to play Marshmallow in the Parshaft deck. Plus, it's tribute fodder for Air Knight Parshaft. So yeah, I would have been happy using it myself still, but just really hate it when it's used against me. And I still hate it being used against me to this day, especially when a certain American friend I know keeps seeing it and using it whenever we have a September 07 game. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. Yeah, Marshmallow would have been a helpful asset. I don't know what other fairy support cards I would have played at the time. Whether or not I would have tried winning tournaments with it is another matter, but I mean, I'd like to think it would have been fine. If we're talking like late September 2007 format, it might have been a bit more challenging when Dark Return format came about, and even more challenging when 5D's era began, because I feel like my fairy deck would have been power crept. It would have played synchros, of course, especially Avenging Knight Parshaft, but again, I would have just struggled to keep up with everyone. I'd like to think that eventually I would have won a tournament with this Parshaft fairy deck thing, or a Royal Rumble. Hell, could have potentially won a minor league tournament, who knows. But chances are I would have had a better chance of winning the Dark Magician's deck Grand Championship, or more likely one of the spin-off series, or one of the fun mini tournaments that I did, like the 400, 500 or 600 subscriber mini tournaments. But again, it depends on how I would have made the deck, really. I mean, maybe I would have merged it with an agent deck. Hell, maybe even some support cards from that structure deck would have helped, and maybe even the counter fairy one, begrudgingly. But no, it wouldn't have turned into a counter fairy deck of some kind. Like, I would never, ever play counter fairies in any way, shape or form. Yeah, that's how much I fucking despise that deck. But yeah, I feel like ultimately I still would have ended up quitting tournaments and quitting the normal current format. But yeah, that's basically what would have happened if a fairy deck, in this case Parshath, would have been my third favourite deck. And yeah, I think I will give this a go as a deck building challenge. I mean, it could have already, at the time of recording, I haven't done that yet, but by the time you're seeing this, then that video probably will be up, and maybe Sacred Arch Aeonite Parshath would have been unbanned in my format. I don't know yet, but yeah, we'll see. Anyway, that's all I got. Thanks for watching.